Hello, everyone, and welcome into the inaugural episode of Friday Night Lights on Preston. I'm your host, Will Cooper. And of course, the first question you probably have is, what is this and who am I? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about it and give us all the background as we cover three teams on this project. We'll mostly be focusing on Gunter, Celina, and our friends in Prosper. So we'll be having those three high schools featured the most. With that being said, if there's anybody further south in Frisco or Plano that decides they want to invite us over, I'll never say no to that. But who am I? Well, my name is Will Cooper. I've spent the last 8 years covering high school football professionally in the state of Georgia. I've covered the top two classifications in Georgia. We did local coverage where we focused on the schools that we felt needed the most attention that they didn't get. I feel the same way about the teams that I've selected for this project. When you look at the talent that is on these teams of Gunter, Celina, and Prosper, and the attention that surrounds high school football here in the state of Texas, I feel like these are teams that need an in-depth look each and every week. So how this project works is you'll get a weekly update from me here on the podcast. This will be the main place that we get to talk. We'll also do updates on Friday nights and the weekends that follow. So we'll select a game, one each week, and I will tell you what that game is coming up here in just a moment as we're getting ready for week one. And we'll go to that game. We'll do a little bit of talking back and forth about how it is. And then that weekend, you'll get a 2-minute drill from me, wrapping up everything that happened the week before so that we can get you all set up and ready for the next week of high school football here in the state of Texas. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about the project. Of course, feel free to interact with us wherever you're finding this podcast. We'll be on YouTube, we'll be on Twitter. And if anybody is interested in it, we'll expand to wherever people would like. This is a very laid back project. Everything we do here is going to be 100% free to you as players, fans, coaches, anybody. We want it to be accessible and easy for everyone to get. So wherever you need it, just let me know. And with that being said, again, there is no paywall for any of this. Everything we do will be 100% free. We believe that's the way high school football should be, the way God intended, because there's no reason for you to have to pay to get an extra look at your local team. That just doesn't make sense to us. So we're going to do everything very local and we're going to keep it as free as possible for you. So, with all of that out of the way, we've got some great games on tap here in week one. Very excited to jump into it with you. And how we'll do the order is we will save our team for our game of the week for last. So, we are going to be headed down to Prosper this week. They'll be taking on Westlake. We're going to jump into that matchup towards the end here, but that'll be our first game of the week. So, excited to be out at Prosper this week. So, we'll start with the smaller school that's also playing on Thursday as they make their way down to South Texas. That is, of course, Gunter. Very excited to see what Gunter looks like this year. Out of all the teams that we cover, probably the biggest question marks that are on the table come from Gunter. 14-2 last season. They won the state title for the third year in a row. A nice 28 to win over Woodville. Jordan Gill's going to take over the role at head coach. Former offensive coordinator, been promoted to that role. So they'll still look a lot of the same. They'll look a lot like they run that pistol motion spread. I kind of call it the pistol T. So basically, it's a lot of indirect motions and trying to get people out of the backfield. So we'll be looking forward to seeing them because the offense probably shouldn't change any. Sophomore Knox Gage is going to take over the quarterback position. 5'11", 165, maybe a little bit undersized compared to what we're seeing from Gunter at that quarterback position, but nonetheless went out to Van Alstyne to watch their scrimmage. Looked very impressive to me, handled the ball well, very few mistakes from what I saw. So I'm excited to see how Mr. Gage can run that offense for Gunter because I think that it's going to be a big step for them. Obviously, returning one of the best players in Jay Campiti, a 6'1", 195-pound running back, had over 700 yards last season, 11 touchdowns. For me, I think he's going to be one of the most impressive players that we get to watch across all levels this year. He's going to be a guy to keep an eye on. So excited to see his production. And he's very elusive for being that big. I was very surprised watching their scrimmage about how he's able to shed off of tacklers, not in the sense of running people over, which is what you would expect with someone who's 6', 195, but in terms of being able to get around, the speed, the perimeter run once he takes it through the offensive line. So very impressed, excited to see what he comes with this season. Wide receiving group is going to be a big question for Gunter. They graduated every single player who had a receiving stat last year, except for one, and that was Compete. And he had 15 yards last year. So again, Knox is going to be throwing to some different people this year. Obviously, a new quarterback as well. The passing game is going to be up in the air. They're going to try and get that ironed out. I think for the coaching staff, they're probably going to be working on finding who they feel comfortable giving those targets to. So I will hold any of the names until we get through tomorrow and Thursday to try and figure out, who is getting those calls to try and get some receiving yards. But excited to see that, of course. And in tight end, you got Reese Danuski. And any name that I pronounce incorrectly, just let me know because I try hard, but I'm not perfect. 6'4", 220 pounds, big target for Gunter. I feel like that might be where they really excel this year in the passing game is with some of those tight end option runs and option passes in the route tree. So I'm excited to see how they can do. The offensive line really only returns one player. Again, the theme for Gunter is when you walk out on the field on Thursday, we're going to see a lot different team than we saw last year. But Creed Rayner is the only returner in the front five. They do have a couple of guys that I think can make some big impacts. Dylan Wiley, Mauricio Porras, and then Alex Valenzuela. 6'8", 275 pounds. We saw him play at left tackle in the scrimmage. I think that they're going to be okay up front. I don't think that there'll be any problem. One guy I also wanted to mention was Caleb Siller. I think those are all names to watch. That offensive line is so crucial to anything you do on offense, but in particular for Gunter, again, who does a lot of that backfield motion, right? Even after the ball's snapped, sometimes it takes a second or two to hand the ball off before you get into the actual play. So I think that's going to be crucial for Gunter to get that line to gel early with 4 new starters. But I do have confidence from what I've seen so far that they will be able to do that. The defense is definitely much of the same. Only 5 returning starters from last season, I do believe. Starting with Hayden Nelson, he's a big guy up front, 6 foot, 220 pounds, which in the 3A level here is a big defensive lineman. Very impressive. Saw some of his highlights from the state title game last year. Very impressed with him. I think he's going to be a big part. The linebacker and Benjamin Rodriguez is a guy that we're watching as well. Kind of plays that outside linebacker flex position depending on what kind of offense the opponent is running, right? Because if you're spreading 4 out wide, maybe you don't need the third linebacker. You're switching into your nickel or dime package. He can kind of do that both sides, but you want him on the field. So I feel like he's going to be a big guy to watch as well. And then their safety, Braden McDaniel, looks like a really good talent for me. He's come up and helped and run support from that safety position, also plays the ball really well. I like what I've seen from him. I feel like they have pieces in each level where even though, again, the defense did graduate a good bit of production from last year, I feel more solid about the defense than the offense. I think they're going to be able to piece that together. And again, just having somebody in each level who's been there before, who's won a state title, right? That adds such a level of confidence that when you go down the road to face their opponent, which we'll get into in just a moment, that they should be able to do that relatively unfazed, I guess I would say. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but you don't have to worry so hard about, getting too big in the moment because you have somebody there that's done it before. So that's always good. They're going to be playing Kincaid this week, kind of a prep school. They actually won the Southwest prep bracket for 4A size schools. Their only loss last year was to Gunter. 23-14 was the final of this game last year. They did graduate their quarterback last year. They were a pretty balanced team. They're going to have to find somebody to fill that role. But one guy to know if you're making the trip down to South Texas or watching the game, Wayne Shanks Jr., very dangerous running back, had over 1,500 yards last year. He's a 4-star talent, hasn't committed, but has offers from plenty of schools, including Baylor, Duke, you name it. He's probably got an offer from them. So it's going to be a big task for Gunter. Again, they can kind of jumping out of the frying pan into the fryer with all the graduations and against a prep school that does have some next level talent, some Power 4 talent. Should be a good test for Gunter to get started. And again, that's kind of the point. When you get started with these out of region, out of conference games, you're trying to get some of that experience so that when you do jump in to the games that affect your playoff seeding, you can do so in good standing. So again, with Gunter, I would say patience may be the word of the week or the next few weeks for Gunter as they figure things out. Again, breaking in a new quarterback, offensive line is going to look totally different. Defense is replacing a lot of pieces as well. I think they're going to be okay. I trust Coach Gill. Again, he knows the offense in and out, obviously, as the offensive coordinator. He knows the area and he knows the kids. I think they're going to be okay. It might take just a little bit for them to get up to speed. So we're excited to see what they do. Again, they'll be playing Thursday night. So that's our Thursday night special game. So we won't be attending that one, not our game of the week, but excited to see how Gunter does coming up this week. And that brings us right to the Celina Bobcats, who, again, defending state title, 16-0 last season, the state title win versus Kilgore. Kind of the same story with Gunter in a way. They graduated 34 last season. 34 seniors off of that team from last season. So that is a huge turnover for a school in 4A. When you're looking at a roster, usually sitting around 60 to 80 players, 34 graduate. That is tough. They are the number one ranked preseason favorite by pretty much any publication that I've seen, and there is a good reason for them to be. First of all, their production from last year, 51.5 points per game, 16.8 points allowed per game. Just a ridiculous number. Again, I don't want to harp too much on the past season because everybody saw what happened, but man, you do have to give credit where credit's due. Of course, the key piece returning for this Celina Bobcat team is Bo Bentley, the 4-star quarterback committed to Oklahoma. From my experience in covering football in Georgia, he reminds me a lot of a guy named A.J. Swan, who played at Vanderbilt his freshman year, started his freshman year, transferred to LSU, and has recently been named the starter at Appalachian State. From watching A.J. and watching Bo both in person, they look very similar to me, their stature. And the thing that both of these guys have that I really enjoy watching is they're able to improvise with the ball. And I think for Bo, that's going to be key this year because they graduated a ton of their receiving core from last year. So when you look at the production of what he did, over 3,000 yards, 47 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. That may be the biggest difference for him as a quarterback that I've seen compared to some of the other high school quarterbacks that I've seen that have gone on to the Power 4 level, is that he already is aware of how to take care of the football and does it at an incredible rate. That is a ridiculous number. So I'm excited, man. I think this is going to be, a great season for Celina, especially with him at the helm. Of course, he also had now over 900 rush yards and 16 touchdowns on the ground. I mean, again, they put up over 50 points per game last year. He was a huge reason why, whether it was off his arm or with his legs, but does it both ways. We've harped enough praise on him. I'll move on. And I do want to lead into the wide receiving core. They lost 2 main targets in Ethan Rucker and Colton Rodriguez. To me, that might be the biggest question. I'll get into the other one here in just a moment. But who's he going to be throwing the ball to? Because as good of a quarterback as he is, if these receivers that are coming up don't get separation, then there's not a lot he can do. I do have confidence in the Celina coaching staff that they will be able to piece that together and find receivers that they feel like, even if they have to flip over some guys from the defensive side of the ball, which we'll talk about in a minute, I do feel like they have the option to do that. So I feel very good about their receiving core coming into this one. Running back, Logan Gutierrez returns just shy of that 1,500-yard mark, 21 touchdowns last year. I don't know what else you can say. I think that, that combo is going to be great. The question in the running game is the offensive line. I think that might even be the bigger question mark for me than the receiving core, because when you have a 4-star quarterback, they can make up for some of the inexperience that receivers will have, but the offensive line is going to have to gel pretty quick. We went out to the scrimmage with Celina, when they played Preston Wood. Their offensive line was a big question mark for me going into that because we knew they were going to be graduating a lot of these players. And I still have that question going into week 1. Easton Clayton looks like a name that people should get to know. I think he's going to be kind of the anchor for that offensive line this year, and hopefully they can find some pieces around him. And again, it's all about gelling as an offensive line, right? Picking up those assignments correctly. Communication is key. And, one thing that's unique here in Texas is that there's a distinct home field advantage with some of the crowds that in other parts of the country you don't get. And that's speaking for California, Florida, and Georgia. Those stadiums hold 3,000, 4,000 people. Here in Texas, you're going to be going on the road to play some places that hold 5,000 plus, 10,000 in some cases. So that's going to be important for them to get that communication right and work on that a little bit. So that's the offensive preview for Celina. Also wanted to mention their tight end, Wyatt Villarreal, 3-star, committed to Pitt, 444 yards last year, 7 touchdowns. I think that's going to be the main connection for Bo this year is Bentley to Wyatt, because he's a big target and he's going to be out there and in the scrimmage, he's kind of one of those, we call them bus guys, right? When they pull up to the school and they get off the bus, if they're on the road or they walk out of the locker room, he's a guy that the opposing team would be like, that's somebody we got to cover. He looks the part, he plays the part. I think he's going to have a huge year. If you wanted somebody that might get over 1,000 receiving yards, early season call here, I might put him on that list. And again, with him being a big body in the red zone, that's such a nice option to have because you can design some runs with Bo out of the pocket. If it's not there to run it, you can flip it to him. He's going to get some of those jump balls for you. So I like what they have when they get to the red zone. It's going to be between the 20s that might be the biggest question for Celina this year. But again, they have the pedigree to earn the benefit of the doubt. So we'll give them the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. Defensively, we got Cameron Lucas on the defensive line. He's got multiple D2 offers. I think he's going to be a guy that anchors that front, along with Carter Lorick and Lawson Allen are two other names to note on that defensive front. They didn't look bad against Prestonwood. To me, Prestonwood was a very large offensive line, so maybe a little bit undersized compared to that. But I don't think you're going to play in normal 4A competition. I don't think you're going to be running into a ton of 6'5", 270-pound guards, which is kind of what Prestonwood had. They had some very large players on the front. So I think that'll be improved. And again, that's something that as they get through the season, we'll see them kind of mesh a little bit. Linebacker, the defensive MVP from last year, Luke Biagini, 5'10", 195-pound linebacker, all over the place, high motor guy. I think he's going to be the captain of that defense, somebody that if you do get into the second level past that defensive front we were just talking about, that the enforcer is back there, so to speak. Peyton Anderson, Jack Jones, other linebackers that look to partner with him in that second level of the defense. I think I have a lot of confidence in the Celina linebacking core moving into their first game, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But not before mentioning the defensive backs of Jacob Brown and Maddox McCoy, a couple of guys that have gotten some early season attention, and I think rightfully so. They looked pretty good. I think for me, that might be the key, is that if that defensive line struggles a little bit, can the secondary maintain their coverage for 4 or 5 seconds? And one thing I should go ahead and tell you is that I'm an old defensive back. I am a big fan of the secondary, so I harp on it a little bit more than the other position groups. But regardless, I think that those two guys will be a key piece to this Celina secondary, and hopefully they can find some other pieces to do that. May even see some of those guys flip around, play wide receiver, really good athletes, and depending on what it calls for, sometimes at the 4A level, it's not shocking to see players working both ways, which we do see more in the lower classifications like 3A. They'll be playing Belleville this week. This was a game that was not close per se, but the box score of 49-30, I think maybe shocked some fans. They're a run-heavy team. They got a running back in Kendrick Turner and Isaac Hranke, who are going to be big parts of that attack for Belleville. I think this plays right into Celina's hands, to be honest. I don't necessarily worry about Celina in the run stopping aspect of their game, especially on defense. I think if you want the big thing to watch, it's going to be how does that offensive line gel and who is Bo Bentley throwing the ball to? Is there someone that separates themselves? Do we have somebody that we feel like, outside of the tight end, do we feel like we have somebody that can separate themselves a little bit? Will be the question for that coaching staff. But either way, that game is on Friday. And again, it is a trip down to South Texas for the Bobcats. So a bit of a drive, a bit of a trek, but I'm sure some of you will be making that trip. And we wish the best of luck to Celina. And hopefully our two teams that are headed down south come home with the win. As far as our team that is staying up here in North Texas, that is Prosper. The Eagles will be taking on Westlake. Again, this is our Friday Night Lights on Preston game of the week. So we'll be at this game coming up here in a couple days. Excited to take that one in. Before we get into Westlake, let's talk a little bit about what the Eagles are bringing into the season. First of all, 8-3 last year. First round loss to Koppel. Tough break there. I feel like Prosper, maybe some of that youth returning. They have a ton of returners this year. We'll get into that in just a second, but it might pay off for them having, I don't want to say burned a season because it really wasn't, but learning throughout the season last year. 16 returning starters, like we talked about, right? Just a ton of production returning. We're going to go over all those names because this is basically like a college football roster that should be playing on Saturday, but not on Friday. But we'll get into that in just a moment. They're normally a preseason top 25 for 6A. I've seen some publications bump them just outside of that. I saw one had them in the top 10. I think for me, they're probably sitting close to the top 10, especially depending on what they do here to start. But I think when you look at what they have, especially on the front line, you'll see why I have them that high. 41.4 points per game last year, allowed 21, just over a touch of 21. That's a good number. Again, it represents a team that went 8-3 and lost to a good team in the playoffs, right? Not a shocking number there. So how do they get to that mark this year? The offensive line, if you're a fan of the offensive line, this is a team you should make your way out to see this year. We got 4-star Zayden Crippen. He's committed to Texas A&M. 4-star Bryce Gilmore to Arkansas. Those are your 2 tackles. Yeah, you got 2 4-star tackles that are playing SEC football. And then you've got your center in Sean Stover. He's committed to Duke, ranks at about a 3-star, but just so much college talent on one line. It's impressive to me. I think they're going to be able to run the ball quite well. Their quarterback is Braden Imhoff. He had over 2,600 yards last year, 27 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Is it horrible for high school to have, close to an interception a game, a little bit less? No. I think with another year under his belt, we'll see that normalize a little bit and probably bring that interception total down. They did graduate their top 2 running backs from last year. Bryce Robinson looks to take over that running back position. Didn't get a ton of game time last year, 241 yards, 4 touchdowns at the varsity level last year for Bryce. I do feel like he's somebody that we can keep an eye on because he's going to be running behind a really good offensive line. So for Prosper, it could be a more of an old school style offense. And I want to speak for the coaching staff, but with that offensive line, you feel pretty comfortable doing some of those running back, options, some of those longer plays that it takes. And then you can kind of throw the ball deep off the play action or even on a straight, route that takes 3-4 seconds because you'll trust your front line to give you that time as the quarterback. And they've got some good targets at wide receiver. Lathan Lace is a 3-star wide receiver committed to Tulsa. Got real close to 800 yards last year, 12 touchdowns on the year. Elliott Brown just picked up a Syracuse offer, so getting some attention again from some of those Power 4 schools. Only had 162 yards last year, but those are 2 really good targets to be throwing the ball to. And again, I think they'll have the time to get open. And then at tight end, you got Jackson Cutts, a sophomore at 6'3", 225 pounds. You also have Trevor Ellis at 6'3", 205. So they got a couple of big tight ends that, again, in the red zone, not that you have any problem with your receiving core, but if you need a bigger target to go to, you got a couple of guys that you feel comfortable giving the ball to there. On the defensive side of the ball, they've got plenty of talent there as well. Jake Johnson's a name to know. He's a 3-star defensive lineman. He's committed to USC. That is Southern California for any South Carolina fan. And then you have Zach Manning along with him. He's committed to Army. So a couple of, Division I prospects there on the front line as well. Linebacking core, Fod Allen, 6'1", 190. Kate Allen, 6'2", 215. Couple of really good linebackers, high motor guys, plug in the hole. Again, you have a solid front seven on this team, I feel like. In defensive back, maybe not any big names in terms of college recruiting, but a lot of athletes. Tyson Stiggers at 6'1", 175. He's picked up a number of FCS offers and Division II offers. DK Jameson at 6'1", 190. Also a multiple D2 offers for him. Also has an offer from Navy as well at the Division I level. And then Logan Thompson as well at 6'1", 165. A very athletic secondary, which they will need in their region because, as probably all of you Prosper fans know, there are some tough customers in the region, and obviously playing in the highest classification in Texas high school football is no easy feat. But I do feel like they have a good opportunity in this one. It doesn't get any easier. They're kicking off the season strong. They're going to be playing Westlake, who lost in the state title to North Crowley. A couple of names to note going into this game. Reese Wise, the 3-star quarterback, is committed to Ole Miss, so he's going to jump on the lane train for Saturday football in college. And then Maddox Flint is the 3-star who's committed to TCU. So a couple of names to know going into this one. To me, this is an opportunity for Prosper to really show that they've learned from last year. This is an opportunity for them to solidify what they've done. I think Prosper's identity is probably going to be a little bit high scoring than more they were last year, hopefully with that front line. And I think the defense, again, averaging giving up 21 points per game, I'll live with that, especially at the 6A level, man. I'll live with 21 points per game all day long. So if they can keep that defense somewhat close to where it was, obviously you're going to have games that ebb and flow more than the 21-point metric. But I feel comfortable with this Prosper team giving us some good wins there. So with that being said, there's a lot to like about this week coming up. Again, whether it's Westlake coming up to North Texas or whether it's one of our other teams in Gunter and Celina headed down south, excited to see what they do and excited to be out at Prosper this week for that game against Westlake. So that's the first episode of Friday Night Lights on Preston. If there's anything that you would like us to cover, just let us know in the comments below. But thank you all so much for being with us. Again, I've been Will Cooper. See you all next week.